So you finally come back for episode 3, or this might be your episode 1. So if this is your episode 1, then welcome. And if it's your episode 3, then welcome back. We're trying some new tech out. So Tom has got a little, what's it called? Mic clip or clip, one of these things. Yeah. So don't rub it too
mic?
much. Otherwise, yeah, that's the one. Lapel mic. This is a classic kind
All
of
the watches.
being interviewed. So as you readjust and crackle into everybody's ears. So this week, what we want to do, I wanted to basically talk about disqualifying yourself and why you might currently or
And this is how to do it.
Yeah, this is how to disqualify yourself. Basically, I want to talk a little bit about why you still might be a doorstop when you're actually a hammer. So a lot of the time, this stuff is driven off fear, fear of what ifs. So it might be that there's a fear of what happens if I can't find a job? What happens if they say I'm not experienced enough? What happens if I'm not good enough? I don't have the skills. So there's a bunch of skill-related stuff. There's a bunch of lifestyle-related stuff. It might be like, well, I can't do that because my wife's currently doing this, or my partner's doing this, or I have kids. And there's a bunch of reasons why you might not do the jump. And I think for me, some of the kind of the processing. So I did a jump from a permanent role to a freelance role or a contractor role, starting my own business, because the crux of it was, why build someone else's dream when I can build my own? Now, I've broadly speaking been kind of an entrepreneurial anyway, but I've always been more so a bit of a worrier in the past and a little bit more like reluctant to do the jump. So
roughly what age were you / how many years did you do after uni? Just to give a bit of context.
So it's 2 years after university. So I didn't have a gap year. I went in at 18 up to then 21. At 21, I moved to London and started a 2-year role, which was web and design. So that's a 2-year. And then just short of 5 years. So basically 7 years of working. So 7 years of working. And also, broadly speaking, I would include my freelance experience, which is I was doing stuff at sixth form. I was doing stuff at A-level. But yeah, I would kind of say 7 years. I would class it as 10 years because you'd include university, and making the jump at that point. And some of the things that I went through is, one, I didn't feel good enough. And the way that I kind of counteracted that is basically got encouragement from others. So my brother-in-law basically had already done the same, of shifting from permanent employment to running his own business as a developer. So asking him, talking then to a bunch of recruiters. So it's kind of like, if you're unsure, utilize somebody else's confidence in you to muster the energy to make the jump. So I think that's one part. I think the second part was a case of like, you can always readjust expectations. If I speak to one recruiter and they're like, oh, you're not going to get this rate, and oh, you're going to find it hard. That's just one opinion. Again, so not only is it ride off other people's energy or other people's encouragement, but also realize that person could be just one opinion, and there might be many opinions, and getting that many opinions is a better balance of approach. So I spoke to loads of different people, and I never took like anybody saying something too harshly, or I always thought this is their opinion and that's fine. Obviously, it doesn't mean that I was cool. I'm kind of like oblivious and going harshly. You're kind of still measuring it and still taking it. And then I think the third thing really is, in my situation, and I recognize everybody has different circumstances, I was like, what's the worst that can happen? Now, the worst that can happen to me is I never find a contract role, which is the first easiest, quote unquote, easiest starting point to starting a business in my industry. I don't find that role. Therefore, I either go and get another permanent employee, or I go back to where I just left, because left on good terms, left on really good terms. So I could just go back to where I was. Now, of course, there'd be a little bit of an ego involved in that, a little bit of like, oh, this is embarrassing, isn't it? But failure is the first step to success, right? Success doesn't come without failures. So sometimes you might have to do it. And also we realize it's kind of like training for any sort of expedition or a mountain climb. You might not have climbed up right to the top on the first go because you've not done this ever before. So it's okay. It's unique. It's new. So if you don't quite get to the top and you come back down, recharge, and then try again. Like basically it's the fact that you're trying again. It's that grit aspect. And by grit, I mean perseverance, which is basically sticking at something, even though it's hard. So I would say, yeah, think of like the worst case scenario. And to me, it's like either go back to a perm role, or I don't find a job. And if I can't find a job, then I can't find my rent. I can't pay my rent, and I can't pay my bills. If I can't pay my bills, worst case, and this is actually a privilege, I basically move in with my mum and dad. Now, of course, at that time I was married, so it would have sucked moving in with like her in-laws, my parents. It wouldn't have been great, but that's better than, you know, if I was homeless on the street. So I think it's about challenging every rebuttal that you have, and just trying to find out if that's rational or irrational. And if it's rational, yeah, I might not be good enough, because, you know, they expect 10 years and not 7 years or something. Then what can you do to decrease that kind of barrier to entry of sorts, just by walking through mentally those things? And I think like one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is disqualifying yourself because you don't feel like you're good enough. Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is such a big deal. Like I've felt it quite a lot, because you think at some moment someone's going to turn around and say, cool, so we've given you all this stuff, but actually we've realized you're not good enough. We've realized that you don't meet the standards, and therefore we're going to get rid of you. And to live in that state is tiring. And it's always not, and sometimes it's not true. It's just my perception of a situation. And again, to like debunk that, it's about asking for other people's opinions. Of course, we all have places where we can improve, but it's about asking for other people's opinions and not feeling, oh, well, I need to do this extra course. If I have this extra qualification, then I will do the hammer move, and not to be in that analysis paralysis. So yeah, I would say a lot of the time we will disqualify ourselves, and we'll say no to ourselves before anybody will say no to ourselves. So how do we counteract that? You counteract that by really facing up to the fears and attacking them one by one, and debunking them one by one, by just rationally and logically thinking about them. End scene.
Thoughts? Come in hot, haven't you?
Coming in hot. That's my hot take. That's my hot take. That was a low to impact. You're probably going to have to rewatch that bit, or re-listen to that bit, I should say.
Slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. And then I guess when you did the jump, other than potentially moving in with in-laws or parents, what practical thing, finances, did you have what people call a runway, like money to pay for at least 1 month's rent, or did you gamble, or what was your runway apart from just fall back on your parents?
So there was probably just 1 month, if that, to be honest. And I was working frantically trying to get a role. So 3 months, even before the move, I was having these conversations, prepping myself, you know, in my industry, getting your portfolio up to scratch, you know, getting your CV up to scratch, having all these conversations. And what I also did is I switched industries or switched roles within an industry. So I was a front-end developer, which means a web designer, and they design the stuff that you see, rather than the data manipulation and like a back-end engineer, as they would say. I moved from being a front-end engineer to being a user experience designer. So I'd shifted more into design. And in doing that, that's also, they're asking different questions. So again, utilize everybody, realize that you're the one with the golden goose. You're the one with the golden goose because recruiters want you in that thing. So it's kind of like figuring out the power dynamics of that and running with that. So yeah, I would say we probably, I definitely would have had to go back to another job if it hadn't worked out in a month. And that's not a lot of time at all, because usually things take like if you're starting a business, usually I would say, you know, just estimate that it's going to take 3 to 6 months to find your first job, and your first job might not pay as much as you'd like it to pay. And that's okay. It's over time, because it's a bit of a slog. And I also think it's okay to find the simplest route into the switch. So for example, for me, I could have quit everything, called up all of my friends to be like, hey, now I'm a designer and web designer. Do you want me to build a website? I didn't do that, because that would have potentially been even harder than going to find somebody that's already spending money in this area. So corporations are always trying to grow. If you look at LinkedIn, again, if you're not on LinkedIn, that's a really good resource. Look at people that are already hiring and align yourself to that. If they're already hiring, that means that they're growing and they've probably got budgets to hire. Therefore, align yourself with that. And again, you don't have to find the hardest route. You can find the simplest first iteration and change later. So for me, that was doing specifically contract work. And I only heard about contract because my brother-in-law was doing it. Started to research. I was like, actually, yes, this exists. And the differentiator of like, if I didn't get it, yes, I would be a bit of a struggle. But if I did get it, I would be within a week instantly in a much better place with basically twice the income that I was on already. Because when we talk about contracts, they typically do a 3-month stint with a day rate, and that day rate is extortionate. A day rate could be anything from £250 all the way to £550. Like there's a real good range. So yeah, there's massive reward, and I think I can't not say this story without acknowledging faith in this, which is believing in something that you can't see in the material sense, or trust, and another word, and having faith and believing in God. I believe that this jump was inspired by God in the sense of I was encouraged by God to do something like this and trust in him, or trust in this higher power, which I believe that higher power is God, to make this jump. And I think sometimes we like control, and it's very difficult in life to give up that control for faith and trust. And if you're anybody with, an understanding of kind of spirituality and that stuff, that's always the age-old balance, because we like to be in control. We like to know, these things are in order, so we can minimize fear, minimize damage, minimize turmoil, and kind of have it as a manageable life. And sometimes there's a balance where having that manageable life might be great, but if you just kind of 10%, 20% increase on instability, there might be a much, much better situation. And all we need is that 10% discomfort, 20% discomfort for a small season, which then has unlocked basically 5 years of growth. And for me, I'm so thankful that I've never had a 0 month in the time that I started, even though that could be a possibility. I could think that as well. Like, what happens after I finish this first 3-month contract? What do I do then? So I've started to release this controlling habit that I think all humans typically have a degree of control, and kind of separate that need for control for trust and belief that this higher power has the best for me. If I can just trust this higher power, then there's another route that will be slightly better and slightly more sustainable if I had just done it in my own strength. And by that, I mean, emailing 1,000 people and doing all this hard work without the direction or kind of the hints and the input from something additional, I guess.
So let's take a rewind. Obviously, it must have been a built-up logical point of view or an emotional element, either from you or you and your wife or whatever, to get to the tipping point to then step out. How is that build-up? What does that feel like? Some of the listeners might be going, is that what I'm feeling now? That turmoil to jump? Could you go into a bit more detail with the difficulties or the struggles of dealing with that, and discernment of knowing if it's not just a bad day in the office and actually you do enjoy your job and you don't want to leave for maybe someone else?
Yeah, I think the analogy that comes to me is kind of like when you're in the water and you're kicking about trying to stay above water. Sometimes that actually makes you sink. And if you just relax, you basically realize that you can float on your back. And that's sometimes a little bit better. But to relax in a situation is like completely opposite to what your mind wants to do, because it thinks that action is the best survival mechanism. Whereas it's kind of like, it is action, but it's a different type of action. It's more so relaxing and kind of recognizing that, okay, we're playing with water here. Broadly speaking, we have this natural buoyancy. If I can just float on my back, I can use less energy. So I think with all this stuff, it comes from, it's not easy. It's not easy. It is very hard. And you have to do it little by little. So again, it's a case of one, just talking with other people and having those reference points. And sometimes people will come to you without you've not even mentioned that you're thinking of doing this. And they'll say, hey, I feel like you should be doing something, like go into like a different season in life. And I would say like, the word that comes to mind is kind of like a pioneer. I feel like you're about to go into like a pioneering season. And they would feel that prompting because it's an idea that has been that's come to them, or a prompt that's come to them that's specifically about me and about my situation. So I had multiple people come over to me without them even really knowing the situation, the dynamics, saying something that affirms or like confirms or kind of reassures the direction in which I feel like many things are drawing me towards. And I think that's it, is the kind of the confirmation side of it. Confirmation comes through other people. It comes through conversations that you generally have. If you're very self-aware, you'll notice that, there was this story that this friend was talking about. Like my brother-in-law was talking about contracting. That's interesting. How would that fit to me? And it's a case of measuring the conversations that you have with, could I see that happening for me? How would that feel to me? And start measuring those conversations and other people's experiences.
So, good cop, bad cop. Was there any experiences that someone's like, I think you'd be amazing at a chef, or something that you didn't think, or come across people that you're like, actually, I can think of the idea, process it, and go, actually, that's not for me, and shelve it or bin it?
Unfortunately, yes. I think sometimes if you're very good at one thing and that becomes your identity. So, for example, I also drum, and people might only know me as a drummer, and they've never seen me as an employee, because typically you don't get to see somebody as an employee. You also typically don't get to see somebody, doing a side hustle or being entrepreneurial to begin with. So I think sometimes there are these lanes that people will kind of know you for. And similar for you, like people may know you more so for hockey. So then that becomes their kind of attachment of, when they think of hockey, they think of you. And when they think of entrepreneurship, they think of something else. So there is those anchor points in life. And then when you step out of that, it might be, for example, in a team. If somebody in a team really likes the fact that you are their striker or you are their winger, and you decide, actually, I know I'm good at hockey to a degree, but there's something else that is inspiring to me right now in this season, and it's over there. It's not in this team, it's somewhere else. Then, of course, the captain of that team, and obviously you were the captain at some point, so like the manager of that team or the captain of the team will be gutted that you're going to move. And in that moment, that manager or team member might be like, oh, don't go. You're not going to enjoy it over there. Like, you're better here because we work dynamically so well. Just think, like, you're going to have to restart over there. So that manager could negatively impact your kind of sense about it's good for me to go through their own kind of insecurities or their own wants, because right now it's good. If Tom leaves, what happens? And I also think it's the idea of lacking. I'm starting to, again, I recognize people's situations are very different. I'm starting to not instantly think that there's not enough, but instantly try and think that there's enough. So, for example, there are enough jobs for the job that you want to find. They are out there. It's just a case of me finding it, rather than, oh, there's no jobs that are going to fit me right now. Kind of trying to think more positively, to recode your own brain in that sense. And I think that also comes with, if you are somebody that's reliant on that person in your team, then think that we'll find another striker and that'll be okay, and that'll lead into something else. So I definitely think that it's two ways of the person experiencing maybe some negativity of like, why are you doing this? You're selfish in leaving this team. Like, it'd be better for that person to be like, no, Tom was great and we really enjoyed having Tom in the team. And also whoever fills that role, it will also be great for them too. It might be hard, but it will be there. It'll be great. And also, I think it's an awareness that actually, yeah, I'm excited for where Tom's going to go. So you want to surround yourself with people that are comfortable when you're there and comfortable when you're not there, because they see that there is a greater potential for you. Because I believe that we're not necessarily kind of this like mono kind of like singular talent. We usually are good at a few things, like 2 things, 3 things. We're usually like that, but we don't get to experience that. We don't get to try that out. We don't get to taste it, to test it, to see if actually, actually you're better at business than at hockey, even though you're really good at hockey, but you would have never known if you didn't try. So yeah, there are people that kind of get in the way, and it's always a case of trying to look behind the motive of whatever they're saying. And are they saying it out of, an insecurity of, well, hang on a minute, I'm going to have to find somebody now, and that's going to be a task for me to do, and it'd be better for Tom to stay in the team,
Yeah. It's very interesting finding what works for you as a hobby or as a job, and then trying to find the next stage of life, depending on if you're getting married or got kids or split up or whatever, the positive change or negative change that might change what you're feeling for your season. Because I think that's the thing, is when you have big milestones in your life, like marriage or have kids or whatever, I think they are times that you tend to reevaluate everything and sort of start from scratch and look at your stock and sort of figure out, do you want to continue to build where you're at, or do you go out and build a new house or find a new hobby or whatever. But it is very interesting.
And I think one of the biggest things is when like you and I speak to people about this kind of jump or this kind of like movement, there's always a sense of, I can't do that, or I can't do that, or I need this, or I'd want to do this first. And they're trying to produce a more comfortable jump, which is completely understandable. But I think experience is the best kind of measuring stick, as in just doing it rather than prepare to doing it. I remember listening to a podcast like a couple of days back where, broadly speaking, if you have a to-do list of any sorts, chances are one of those to-do list items is plan something, like plan business, or like your to-do item is to plan something. And maybe sometimes it's not to plan something, it should be to just do it. What can you do today, which means then tomorrow somebody could buy off you, that they could prepay for something tomorrow. And I'm personally an advocate of the action over the kind of the analysis, because we all know there's this analysis paralysis, and it's all in the name of, I understand why, because I've been there too. It's all because of that fear and the need of control. So if you can manage that and do action, and I think as well, like, find the smallest iteration. If you want to build a business, you don't necessarily have to do 6 months of planning to get it off. What would be like a business, like a startup version of it that you could do in 1 month, or what could you do in 2 weeks? What could you do in 1 day? And sometimes you'll surprise yourself that actually there is an iteration that you could do in a much shorter time scale, which then you can get the feedback quicker, which then you can adjust your situation sooner, because it might be that everything is an assumption to begin with, and assumptions get clarity to like certainty. So your assumption might be, I love animals, I love dogs in particular, I think I could build a new dog biscuit like product or something. Now that would take a long time to do. So what would be like the quickest, easier iteration of that? It might be that you first resell a product or white label a product that already exists, rather than going from scratch and start to build your own product of mixing the right ingredients and stuff. It might be that you white label it and just brand something. Then at least you could sell tomorrow because it already exists and you're just creating a brand. So that'd be quicker than doing a massive 6 month, kind of 12-month product development cycle as well.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And then what do you advise for people that might want to get out of their situation, but they have no idea where to start? Like, how do they get into the creative headspace to figure out what works for their skill set or their experiences?
I think ask for help. And I don't mean paid help. Just go and ask kind of friends, like, hey, what do you think I'm good at? Or like, sometimes we forget to ask people to build up that knowledge base, to build up the confidence, build up the reference points to be able to do something. And I think that really it as well, it kind of comes down to character. entrepreneurship isn't going to be for everybody, and that's completely fine. The person that's like number 5 at Facebook is probably doing way, way better than someone starting a business, so it's okay to be an employee. It's not that it's bad to be an employee. It's about finding the right fit for you. And of course, as a character, you might find that, oh, I'm not creative. And I would challenge you to be like, if you feel that you're not creative, speak to somebody and ask them, and speak to the right type of people, the people that are for you, the people that encourage you. Because you might find out, okay, you're not creative in the sense that you can draw a picture and paint a painting, but you're creative in, using the skills that you have to solve a problem. And that's what business is, right? Solving people's problems. So yeah, I would say talk to people. And Tom and I love talking to people about exactly this stuff. Now, I was thinking a couple of weeks back that we should basically say, if you comment on this post, we'll pick the best comment and we'll give you a free hour of consultation. We'll give you a free hour of chat where you can share what you feel. And it might not need to be like fully formed. It might be like, hey, this is my situation. I don't really like where it is. I don't know where to go, but what do you see? What opportunities do you see? So I'm more than happy to talk to anybody, even actually, like a half an hour. More than happy to have a free half an hour, no strings attached. It's not going to be like, and therefore you should now join our course that's $5.99. None of that stuff, because we love helping people.
Apart from the second hour.
Yeah. The second hour is the big one. No. Like I'm happy to give like a half hour or an hour to kind of just chat this through, because we typically don't give space for this. We typically think, we've always known that lawyers are expensive. We know that counselors are expensive, or we perceive those to be expensive. Any sort of external help, or a physiotherapist is expensive, or an acupuncturist. We think that those are expensive. And that means you kind of like don't do it, which is completely understandable. And what I want to do is kind of remove that barrier to entry to like, hey, like, let's just chat. Let's see. We might not have the answer, and that's fine too. But at least you've started to give it space. You have to be intentional about, I know I said don't plan, drive action, but you have to be intentional about finding out the answer as well. And push yourself towards that by booking in your diary. Okay, this time I'm going to just like sit and imagine. I think I've not imagined enough what could be. And in doing that a little bit more, I've kind of imagined, like I said in the first episode, like I'd love to build a university. And the reason why I'd like to build a university is, yes, of course, I'd call it Ryland University, and that would be great. But more so is because I think education is the foundation. And I think there's a type of education that's more interesting, which is this problem solving in teams. Like Elon Musk basically created a school in his own company because you had parents coming over to work for him, and they would have to drive to drop off the kids and all this stuff. So you try to make it a little bit easier, in the same way that a company might feed you, like Google's and those, they feed you and give you snacks. Like Elon Musk wanted to basically give childcare. So he got this guy to create a school with him, and the school is driven around problem solving, real life problem solving, because a lot of the time we're taught concepts, like the concept of Pythagoras. I don't really know what the real situation is to use Pythagoras, but let's say that there's a challenge of you just bought a bunch of IKEA furniture and you need to get it through your front door. Like you actually need Pythagoras to calculate that to get it through. And working in a group as a team, that is good skills. So they've driven this kind of like school creation out of teams problem solving, and they're like kids, and they've actually developed it now so anybody can join. Yes, it's a bit expensive, but it's like a monthly subscription that your child would join online and do those kind of activities, and that would be a new methodology of school. I mentioned in the first episode about Daughters of Destiny, documentary about this kind of like rich business guy sells his business. He out in kind of like India direction, sells his business. He then starts a private school where he's taking one child from these families in a particular deprived area, and he's taking them on board at 4 years old, and they teach them in this school all the way from 4 up until like college, and then they pay for their college. And what they're hoping to do in taking that child then is taught the skills necessary, and then kind of go back to their family like twice a year to impart that knowledge and help their own community. And the basis is exactly that we help one so you can help many. And I thought that was a really, really cool idea. So I think that would be the execution potentially of removing somebody out of their situation so you can impart completely different understandings of the world and about society, because it's not impacted about through like what you see. If you see kind of like a particular situation, you might believe that that is the roof. That's your life. You can't go any further. So in taking someone out, of course, that's like hard. But in taking someone out, that gives them the best circumstance to create a culture of encouragement, of I was going to say thriving and flourishing in the same sentence. I couldn't say it in the same word. But yeah, that thriving and flourishing in the same sense together, basically. So yeah, that's that vision. Imagining that gives me the drive to, as I said last time, to be then efficient today over being inefficient. Be efficient tomorrow, be efficient. And it builds to this vision of like, it would be freaking awesome to build a school or a university that kind of does something like this. Because I think that is the baseline for everything, is that education. And out of education, things like impact then can happen.
And that's the thing, it's an idea that then you flesh out with different people. You find out things that will work and things that won't work, but also you look at different ways of how different countries are doing it, or Elon Musk of how he's doing it, and you slowly get closer. Okay, you might not have a university tomorrow, but it is that step forward that feeds that I need to do this at some point. So it's feeding that knowledge. So when it does come to fruition, it's like tending a garden, and then you finally got an apple tree after 20 years or whatever with fruit on it.
Yeah,
there was that slow watering process.
Yeah, and there was another place that I went to. I went to this conference in Denmark, and it was on site of this school where they were teaching like sport as like a course, and then they were teaching another like two other courses, and it was like I'm not sure if it was like sport, entrepreneurship, and something else. And that's just a little bit different, where we're basically building someone to be a athlete, or building someone to be a footballer, or something like that. That's like really cool. So yeah, it's just trying to take a different approach to what has worked. Maybe not, it might not be the best iteration. So while we have to sustain what we have, can there be another branch of people that go out and innovate and try and figure out if there's a better iteration of what we know as school? Because we're not all people that can sit still from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We're not all that way. So can we adapt that a little bit further?
And I think it is just different ideas are developed. So people that are listening might have an idea that they had 8 years ago, but there wasn't the infrastructure or the community around them or whatever to implement that idea. Doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It just sometimes isn't the right timing.
Yeah, and to add to that, when you were asking about like, how do you know that this thing is the way you should go? And I was talking about like other people sometimes will say something and they've not even been told about the situation. They'll say something that kind of aligns quite nicely to what you're trying to do. I would also say that sometimes you'll listen to podcasts and something in the podcast will jump out. And by jump out, it will sound like that particular word or those phrases have been louder. Blow your eardrums in. Will be louder. But it's not louder. It's just like you've heard it with more focus than everything else that they spoke about. Like even 2 nights ago, Kimmer was kind of thinking about a situation and she put the TV on. A particular guy was preaching called TD Jakes. And he, line for line, word for word, explained exactly what was going on and the benefits of X. And this is what you're thinking and this, and kind of gave like basically the answer to the question that she had. And it's funny because I heard it at the exact same time. And that recording was done 11th of August, 2022, like a couple of months back. So it's just, it doesn't always have to be a person. It might be that you've listened to the radio and something's come out, or you've watched a TV program and something's come out, or a podcast or whatever. And I think that's cool. Like this is ultimately a partnership. I don't feel like it's this distant thing. It's a partnership of, I've got some stuff inside of me, like skills and talents that, you know, need that kind of like watering to come out and flourish and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. So I would just repeat again, if anything that we've said has like irritated you, that's the best way probably, irritated you or worked yourself up or like challenged you in any way, then chat to us. we're not going to charge you. We can do it with video or without video, because I know there's introverts around, and I think sometimes not having video is helpful. Just to like help you out. That there's no you therefore have to carry on talking to us at all. We'd rather just help you from where you are than anything else. Go and hammer those nails. Hammer time.